This is CBC Vancouver News.
Heavy downpour ahead. Environment Canada issues rainfall warnings for parts of the province as an atmospheric river sets up over BC's south coast.
And we're all connected in this, and it's a global revolution.
Human chain. Thousands of demonstrators lined the Lionsgate Bridge in support of protests in Iran. And the Halloween fun begins for people and pumpkins and pets. Good evening, I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you for joining us. Today, thousands of protesters gathered on the Lionsgate Bridge, forming a human chain as they denounced the Iranian regime. CBC's Saurabh Sandhu was there and brings us this story.
Protesters chanting slogans and waving flags. It looks as if a sea of humanity has descended on the Lionsgate Bridge. Thousands of people have gathered here in Vancouver, standing side by side, stretching over the city's most iconic bridge. They stand here in solidarity with the global protest against the current Iranian government, which they refer to as heartless and bloody regime. The protest is being spearheaded by the families of the victims of Flight 752. The flight shot down by Iran's Revolutionary Guard in January 2020.
This is my daughter, Sophie. She was 5 at the time. My wife, Sahan. My brother-in-laws, Alman and Negar.
Wahid Imami lost his family in Flight 752. He and other family members of the victims were at the forefront of the protest today.
This is not a regime, this is a killing machine.
Many protesters have the signs with the name of Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old whose death after being detained by Iran's so-called morality police started these worldwide protests. Some are convinced that their protest will bring lasting change.
This is a feminist movement, and it's going to have lasting impact on the world.
Passing vehicles slow down and honk horns to show their support. Local community leaders also joined in.
Conversations that are happening not just within the Iranian-Canadian community, but also the Canadian community at large, demonstrates that the work that these organizers are doing, that the community is doing to raise the voices of people in Iran is working.
This affects everyone. It affects Ukraine. It affects Afghanistan. It affects Syria. And we're all connected in this, and it's a global revolution.
The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has set Saturday as the deadline to end the protests in the country.
No, we're going to keep going till we change this regime.
Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
To the rainfall warning now. Environment Canada has issued public alerts for severe weather on much of the BC coast and Vancouver Island as an atmospheric river is incoming. Rainfall warnings are now in place for Metro Vancouver, Howe Sound, West Vancouver Island, the Fraser Valley, Central Coast, and inland sections of the North Coast. Special weather statements cover the rest of southwest BC. Rainfall could top 100 millimeters in some areas. The Weather Service says heavy downpours can cause flash floods and water pooling on roads, so watch for possible washouts near rivers, creeks, and culverts. However, the rainfall is not expected to cause serious, widespread flooding like the flooding we saw in November 2021. Environment Canada says the weather should ease up by Monday. Officers are investigating after the body of an unidentified person was found in a building fire in Kamloops this morning. The fire was discovered in a former restaurant that had been closed for several months. An officer was patrolling the 100 block of Palm Street just after 7:30 this morning and came upon the fire. Kamloops RCMP is working with the BC Coroner Service to identify the deceased individual and the source of the fire. Police are asking anyone with information or video surveillance of the building to come forward. A woman connected to serial killer Robert Picton has been given a 12-month suspended sentence for uttering threats. As CBC's Rafferty Baker reports, one of the threats specifically referred to Picton's murders. And a warning, this story contains distressing details.
Lynn Ellingson testified at Picton's trial that she had driven around with him to pick up a sex worker, who she later saw dead at Picton's barn at his Port Coquitlam pig farm. Ellingson has now entered a guilty plea and been given a 12-month suspended sentence for uttering threats. Tammy Sampson runs a traffic control company where Ellingson worked for several years. The court heard on Friday that Ellingson made dozens of threatening calls and texts to her boss, threatening her as well as her husband and children, including a threat with a reference to her connection to Picton. Sampson says it was in a voicemail.
She was going to grow some pigs, and I was going to be the first one that she was going to feed to them.
Ellingson chose not to make a statement, but told the court she wanted to apologize to Sampson. The judge made the unusual recommendation that she seek victim of crime counseling herself, given the trauma Ellingson has experienced and the way she's dealt with it. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Abbotsford.
To BC's ongoing healthcare struggles. Port Hardy's emergency room is closed this weekend. It's the second weekend in a row and a month already full of other closures. On Friday, Island Health announced that the Port Hardy ER would be closed starting that night until 7 a.m. on Tuesday. It was also closed last weekend. The health authority says the problem is staffing. While it is making efforts, it says, to recruit and retain doctors and other care providers, it says it does not currently have enough staff to keep the emergency rooms open 24/7. This weekend, people with emergencies are asked to call 911 or go to Port McNeill, about a 45-minute drive away. But some encouraging news on the health front. It appears BC's flu shot campaign is off to a record start. The provincial government says 630,000 people got the shot in the first 17 days of the campaign. Approximately 43% of those people also got a COVID-19 booster at the same time. And for the first time this year, all seniors 65 and older can get an enhanced influenza vaccine. The vaccines are widely available for free in public health units, participating pharmacies, and many primary healthcare providers' offices. Well, some of BC's Newari Canadian community came together tonight to ring in their Lunar New Year. It's an annual event celebrated across the country, and it's a night filled with cultural performances, food, worship, and tradition. More than 200 people sat in rows on the floor. In front of them, small mandalas serve as an offering to oneself. The ceremony signifies an auspicious beginning of the Lunar New Year, invoking prosperity and longevity. Nepal, a country in South Asia, is made up of more than 100 different cultures and languages. And the Newars are indigenous to Nepal's Kathmandu Valley. In BC, there are about 400 Newarian Canadians. This week, a group of pilots based in Comox won an international award in London for its work during last November's severe flooding here in BC. The Canadian Air Force Squadron 442 was involved in the mass evacuation of more than 300 people who were stranded on Highway 7 during the landslides in Agassiz.
Through inspiring initiative, expert coordination, and stalwart airmanship, the Cormorant crews were able to land on the highway in appalling weather conditions and gale-force winds.
The award was given for, quote, outstanding contribution to the preservation of life during a natural disaster. It was handed out by the International Honorable Company of Air Pilots. Last November's 11-hour operation was the largest mass evacuation in the squadron's history. All told, they rescued 311 people, 25 dogs, and 1 cat. Hallow weekend is upon us, and in North Vancouver, the pumpkin-themed festivities, well, they're in full swing.
The theme of my pumpkin was to make a scared pumpkin. Just, I don't know, because everyone always does scary pumpkins. I wanted to switch it up a little.
My inspiration was a black cat. Okay. So I actually have 4 cats of my own, so I just kind of got inspiration from my own pets.
The second annual Great Grand Boulevard Pumpkin Walk took place today in North Van, and families gathered in costume for an activity-filled evening. The attractions included 200 jack-o'-lanterns carved by elementary school students and other members of the community. There were also food trucks and performances, including a dance group and local artist Adam Woodall. Now, you could argue the best part of Halloween is getting to put on a costume. Well, pet owners often like to share in that fun and dress up their four-legged friends. In Victoria, dogs were decked out for the Emily Carr House's second annual Halloween Pet Costume Parade, showing off their most creative costumes from bananas to turtles. And the dressed-up doggies even won some awards, including Best Scary Costume and Best Owner and Pet Costume Combo. Proceeds from the event benefit the Emily Carr House. It's a glacier in our own backyard, responsible for some of the water flowing into Coquitlam's taps. But it's disappearing fast. Ali Bitarge has more.
I know when I first came here in 2006, where I'm standing, this was covered in ice here, or a 1 or 2 meter thick of ice.
The Coquitlam Glacier is nestled on its deathbed. It's more than 1,400 meters high in elevation, far above the Coquitlam watershed. This glacier is the last one standing among a number that formed centuries ago in Metro Vancouver. Today, during the warmer seasons, the runoff provides about 2% of the water in the Coquitlam Reservoir. But that won't be the case for much longer.
This ice is thinning and it's going to decay fairly rapidly. It's one of our best climate indicators of change. And I don't expect this glacier to last past 2050, really.
We found the glacier glistening under 20-degree heat because of unusual summer-like conditions into October. From above, the warning signs are everywhere. The water levels visibly low, the cedars reddening, and a stripe of gray smoke stretching across the sky from the wildfire burning at Manning Park. Scientists are here to measure how fast the glacier is melting using LiDAR technology.
Those markers were the edge of the snow.
Okay, and that's how
so
much it's
dropped. So in 2
weeks,
it's dropped and receded that much.
Wow.
The ice has actually dropped 2 to even 5 meters in just 2 weeks. A lot of that is seasonal snow melt at the top of the glacier, but it's certainly struggling in these warm and dry conditions.
Roughly 200 years ago, during the Little Ice Age, the glacier used to spread past where the point I'm standing to near the edge of that valley. And it used to be way higher, but now it's been reduced to running water during this time of year when it's not snowing.
This is a heavier downstream flow than usual at this time of year, courtesy of the warmer weather. But much of this water will soak into the ground before making it to the rivers. And the water that does make it to the reservoir is not enough to replenish it.
But it's something. And with these glaciers disappearing, that source of water is then gone.
Once the glacier is gone, Marshall says the Coquitlam Reservoir will rely primarily on rainfall.
And we know our precipitation patterns are changing with climate change.
All factors going into long-term water planning.
So I think it's important to look at this, realize how quickly these resources are disappearing. And this is, a sign of what's happening elsewhere in North America for sure, but around the world. And think about how we can conserve our water, our drinking water, as we move into the future.
It's an endangered species, right? And it's an iconic image of what's happening in the region.
At this point, there's no stopping the Coquitlam Glacier's death spiral. What's left of it serves as a stark reminder of challenging times ahead, pushing humanity into uncharted waters. Ali Bitarge, CBC News, Vancouver.
"151 people are dead in South Korea after a stampede at a Halloween event in Seoul. More on this after the break. 151 people are dead in South Korea after a stampede at a Halloween event in Seoul. More on this after the break, but we have the story for you right now. After that stampede at a Halloween event in Seoul, local reports say 100,000 people had poured into a popular downtown area. They say a crowd surged into a narrow alley and fell down and were trampled. Many suffered cardiac arrest. Some of the bodies have been sent to a local gym for identification. Officials worry that the number of dead could increase as there are dozens more people injured and in serious condition. And officials say scores of people are killed or wounded in Somalia's capital after a pair of car bombings. Both were outside the Education Ministry building. The second detonated as ambulances arrived. One ambulance driver and a first aid worker were among the wounded. No one has claimed responsibility. The militant insurgency to topple Somalia's government is now more than a decade old. Russia says it is withdrawing from the agreement that allowed Ukrainian grain to be exported from ports on the Black Sea. The original agreement was signed in July. Until then, Russia had been blockading Ukrainian ports, and the resulting world shortages threatened some countries with famine. Russia says it's in response to a Ukrainian drone attack today in Crimea. Ukraine says there was no attack and accuses Russia of trying to trigger an artificial famine. Also today, Russia accused Britain of planning and detonating last month's Nord Stream gas pipeline explosions. Moscow offered no evidence to back up the claim. You are not alone. That's the overarching message at rallies held around the world this weekend in support of Iranian protesters. The country has been rocked by demonstrations for over 6 weeks. The CBC's Meg Roberts looks at what's driving the international outrage.
Justice for Iran!
Chants for freedom for Iran echo around Toronto's Dundas Square as tens of thousands of protesters line Yonge Street for more than 25 kilometers.
We're all fighting for freedom, but our heroes are back home.
The human chain protest here in Toronto, just one of several seen across the world today and in other major cities in Canada.
It's unbelievable. Even 2 months ago, I couldn't imagine this crowd on the streets. Now people are not scared, and people are motivated to come on the streets like this.
For many of those lining the streets, it's personal.
All my family in Iran, and we can't do anything, unfortunately, but this way at least we can tell the world what's going on in Iran.
Protesters and organizers saying today's demonstration is also meant to put pressure on the Canadian government to take action against Iran's leaders. Justin Trudeau joining in on the rally in Ottawa today, reiterating his stance on the Iranian government.
Even years from now, when perhaps there will be a change of regime and things will be better in Iran, those people responsible now will never be forgotten, will never be allowed into Canada.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard issued a stark warning on Saturday, saying it will be the last day of protests in the country. The threat is concerning for Iran experts.
We have yet to see the full extent of the regime violence unleashed. And what worries me is that we're getting closer and closer to more violence, not that it hasn't been violent enough.
Protesters in Toronto say no matter what happens on the streets in Iran, there will be voices that continue to speak up across the world.
Until we get what we want, we won't go anywhere. We'll stay here. We support people of Iran.
Meg Roberts, CBC News, Toronto.
In the U.S., security is being stepped up for election candidates after Friday's hammer attack on the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Campaigning for the critical midterms is about to head into its final week. And as Chris Reyes shows us, a former president has hit the trail.
It is good to be back in Michigan.
Former President Barack Obama stumped for Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer, one of a number of big-name rallies happening across the U.S., less than 2 weeks before the midterm elections. Vice President Kamala Harris was in Baltimore for House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer.
So-called leaders
have been using the bully pulpit. They're using the bully pulpit in a way that is promulgating hate.
At the rally in Michigan, Obama also called for a return to civil discourse as someone in the crowd booed him.
You don't have to interrupt each other. You don't have to shout each other down. It's not a good way to do business.
Calls for a less heated rhetoric comes after Friday's violent attack against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi. Police say 42-year-old David DePepe was looking for Nancy when he broke into their San Francisco home. President Joe Biden denounced the attack after casting his ballot in Delaware.
Condemn what produces the violence, and this talk produces the violence.
Several agencies, including the FBI, have issued a warning about possible violence from extremists who may be unhappy with midterm results. The heated climate comes amid some hotly contested races across the country. Early voting tallies showing record turnouts in Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. Early voting started today in New York and California.
Your typical midterm election, you're struggling to find issues that people are passionate about. This time, people are fired up.
The midterm vote, a judgment call on President Joe Biden's legislative agenda, with gun control, inflation, abortion, just a few of the defining issues on the ballot. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Here's a time lapse of downtown Vancouver's cloudy skies today. I'll have your full forecast next. Let's take a look at your weather forecast now and more on that rainfall warning in effect. But let's start with your current temperatures. And we're certainly seeing cooler days in BC. As you can see, we're sitting at 11 degrees at Vancouver Airport right now, 11 at Abbotsford, and 10 degrees in West Vancouver. And yes, the story is a wet and windy weekend. We got up to 40 millimeters of rain today at YVR. Tomorrow, though, that is when we're going to get the brunt of the rain, looking at up to 100 millimeters expected at YVR as that atmospheric river sets in. On Monday, we could see up to 80 millimeters of rain for most regions, up to 100 for parts of Metro Vancouver and Vancouver Island, even topping 100 millimeters for some of those areas. Elsewhere in the province, here's how tomorrow looks for you. In Cranbrook, rain with a high of 11 degrees. Kelowna, showers and a high of 12. At Dease Lake, rain mixed with flurries and a high of just 3 degrees up there. For Vancouver, that heavy rain comes tomorrow through to the evening, and things do start tapering off by Monday and Tuesday. And look at that, even a little sunshine on Wednesday just to help you get through the week. And the rain comes back on Thursday. And that's your late news for this Saturday. Thank you so much for watching. For more news anytime, you can go to our website, cbc.ca/BC. I'm Michelle Eliot. I'll be back with you tomorrow night, or will I? Happy Halloween weekend.